Right. I think I'm live. I think I'm live. And welcome to anyone who's joining me live on YouTube or Podia, one of the two. If not, I'll upload this video to the platform afterwards so that you'll be able to access it for at least a period of time after that. So today's discussion is on conflict and conflict resolution, looking specifically at martial arts and in particular Tai Chi. And we're going to do this by presenting a number of points of view. Don't think this is all just me. I am going to be merely the messenger. I'm going to be certainly playing around with some of these ideas, but presenting them to you as they are out there in the world, gathering them together and giving you an idea of how the discussion is going on. So I'm going to be quoting a few references here and there, and you're going to find those references on the platform, and I'll give you links to that later if you haven't already got them. So welcome to the, what's this, the fifth or the sixth webinar? I can't remember how many I've done now on aspects of Tai Chi in the 21st century, and this one specifically is focused on conflict and conflict resolution. What do we mean by that? What are we even talking about? Well, first of all, I'd like to give you this little quote from a book that I'm reading at the moment, and so I'm just going to read it to you, and here, if I can find it, there we go. It's "The sage no longer goes to war." Athletics are for play and fun instead of winning or losing. Sexuality is for ecstasy and love rather than conquest and self-indulgence. Economics are for peace and justice rather than mindless accumulation. Relationships are vehicles for compassion rather than struggles between egos. Be alert for signs of continuing conflict within. An angry voice, a tightening of the chest, or a critical feeling, take a deep breath and disengage. It is time to live and to teach a way of peace. I like that quote. It's from The Sage's Tao Te Ching by William Martin. You can find it on my list of best books on Tai Chi and Taoism. So once again, if you just joined, thanks for joining me on this short webinar on conflict, which I'm going to try and answer two questions. The first, violence, conflict, confrontation, aggression, to what extent are the martial arts, and in particular Tai Chi, a help or a hindrance in these situations? And two, if we assume such training is helpful to focus on an ultimate aim of controlling another person, is there a way in which we can move beyond it in seeking to resolve conflict? Well, that's what we're here to talk about today. You can feedback on the new forums. Yes, that's right. Come over to 21stcenturytaichi.com. There's a new community section, free to join, and you can tap into the wealth of knowledge, expertise, and advice people far more qualified than I can share. Look for the topic on webinars and leave me your thoughts. Don't just rant at the dog after this. Let me know what you think. So what do we mean by conflict resolution? How do we handle our relationships? Intimate, social, familiar, political. If we're not able to handle them well, there's a sort of breakdown, and this can often lead to conflict, distress, misunderstanding. And as we know, aggression. Now, can you think of an example of breakdown of communications on a political level, for example, in the globe, anywhere on Earth? It's a difficult one, isn't it? I can't debate you. So we're going to be looking at tools to enable us to deal with this more effectively, meaning that we can de-escalate potential issues of violence, move towards greater understanding and healthier lifestyles, or when we choose not to go to war. Now, traditionally, arguments for martial arts handling conflict resolution really well, it's generally said that those that practice the martial arts are better at avoiding conflict, for they've been trained to avoid it. Now, is this true? Should we take a closer look at this argument? It goes along the lines of martial artists can pick up non-verbal clues about potential violence or physical threats earlier than non-martial artists can. This enables them to respond appropriately. Martial artists are trained not to respond to provocation, but to control their emotions, remain relaxed, and not lash out in anger. So to recap, we're saying that traditionally trained martial artists are trained to read a situation and respond appropriately. What do you think? Is it right? Let me know in the community. As someone who trained in traditional martial arts, I've got two varying views on all of this, but I'd like to learn what you think too. Because when I look at the evidence, and there's plenty of evidence to support part one of this, the bit about, reading the situation, there's far less to support part two, the bit about appropriate responses. In fact, some argue that instead of intervention that diffuses tension, we can often escalate it if we focus too much on controlling the other person rather than trying to reach an understanding. So arguments against martial artists handling conflict resolution. These were, well, what I found out is I looked at some studies that come out of the 1980s and 90s. I'll put links to them, looking at traditionally trained karateka, black belts, I think it was in particular. And it showed that, if I remember right, there was questionnaires afterwards about how they felt about particular confrontational situations, and it was compared to non-combative sports to determine which of the two groups, those trained traditionally or those in non-combative sports, were more or less inclined to react aggressively at the end of that survey. And it found, interestingly, that the traditionally trained karateka were less likely to respond aggressively to those situations, but only those that trained in the more traditional practices. Including, what do we mean by that? Those that included elements of respect, deference, ritual forms, discipline, etc., embodied by the traditional style. So is the conclusion that you should be practicing a traditional style to be able to handle conflict better? Is that the conclusion? Well, anyone who's read anything by me knows that I've been a consistent critic of many of the traditional aspects of the martial arts, the way that certain elements amount to virtual cultural appropriation, Orientalism, hierarchical power relationships, unaccountability, a lack of transparency, elements very much present in many martial arts, and even more so in some of the traditional ones, including Tai Chi. So you may get to handle conflict better in the traditional arts, but there could be another price to pay regarding self-awareness, personal growth, independence, or capacity for critical thinking. Whereas much more modern systems, such as MMA, may bypass some of this Orientalism and power structures, but do little to provide the practitioner with greater skills for conflict resolution. So, what's the answer? And where does Tai Chi come into any of this at all? Because it feels like it's sort of lost in between different categories of arts. But then again, it always feels that way to me. On the one hand, Tai Chi reeks of traditional practices, cultural appropriation and Orientalism is rife in the arts. What do I mean by that? The imitation or depiction of aspects of Eastern cultures for a specific purpose is predominantly marketed, something indulged in by both East and West, I should point out. On the other hand, Tai Chi specifically provides superb tools for not only tension and aggression recognition, but practical exercises for dealing with it that aim to de-escalate, such as partner working, yielding, grounding, rooting, breathing, push hands, not competition though. See the video examples on the thread for this in the webinar on the community I posted up to earlier today. Now, it appears for this to be truly a useful tool, those tools that I mentioned previously in Tai Chi, they must be taught alongside other training of ideas or principles, avoiding, where at all possible, fixed stylized forms. For fixing, we stagnate, obsessing with prearranged patterns of behavior that reality never replicates. And again, be careful, because in Tai Chi, very often that's all you're taught. obsessive forms over and over and over again. As Confucius said, the one who would be in constant happiness must frequently change. And freestyle practice teaches poise in the face of change. Freestyle. Make it up as you go along. My first introduction to some of these ideas, and you may think, what is he babbling about? Where did he get them from? Well, you can track them back in a lot of different sources. But certainly one of the first people who ever influenced me into thinking about conflict in other terms than traditional opponents was Thomas Crum in his classic book, Magic of Conflict, that came out, I think, in 1998. Yeah. He examines various non-aggressive ways to resolve conflict using it as an approach to build bridges rather than knock down walls. I'll leave a link to the book in the thread if I haven't already done so. So, in conclusion, conflict resolution, it's not an easy one. I mean, it's fairly complex, all of this stuff about how, why, what we're looking for in the long term, short term, whether the tools are appropriate, whether they're actually helping or hindering. But traditional practices give us at least a structure, a framework for coping with the world in conflict and constantly and seemingly in tension. Yet if that training embodies power structures that we unconsciously replicate because we unquestionably copy everything Sifu tells us, training our responses to effectively seek to rapidly dominate any situation, win over other people, then perhaps we're training in wrong techniques, or at least in the wrong ambience, or we should be opening our curriculum to include far more tools than we are currently being taught. So I'm personally convinced that the martial arts provide us with a wide range of tools to help us with conflict resolution, but only when we let go of some of the more unhealthy competitive practices, or at least redefine them so that competition is not just about winning or losing or controlling someone or losing control to someone, but incorporates a little bit more about understanding too. Now, I know that's difficult to see in practice. That's because the path is rarely lit, because it's rarely walked down. That's why it's so dark, and you need to shine the light as you construct the route ahead of you so others can follow in your light and step out of the fear of darkness. What do you think? Come over to the site and enter the forum and leave me your comments so other people can join into the conversation. Now, I've presented a series of other people's views and mine thrown in there if you can possibly disentangle them from each other. I'm certainly not coming down one way or the other, but I do think that some of the internal arts provide us with a wider range, a bigger toolbox, if you like, than some of the more traditional, harder styles. And that's probably contrary to a lot of what you may think yourself, that actual fighting gives you the tools necessary to handle conflict well. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think. Come over to the site, look for the topic, look for the community, look for the topic on webinars, select it. If you don't find it, you just look for topics, select that one, and you can follow it. Post up videos, post up any comments you want, leave me a comment, tell me what you think. And before I go, it's okay to disagree. It's okay to have diversity of thought. This is what we're after. We were meant to have that. That's the point of it all. That's the point of life, to explore diversity and learn from it. And Century Tai Chi has lots of this. Webinar, short courses, PDFs, articles, videos, etc. to share. Come by, say hi. Thanks for taking the time to watch this. Be good, and I'll see you over there.